Blood satellite.
Okay, we'll cover Duganism because we gotta get going.
We promised.
I know. I told people because really the question I went out to seek, I wanted the answer to, was what the fuck is Duganism?
Yes.
And I think I got the answer because I bought the book, I read the book, The Fourth Political Theory by Aleksandr Dugin, and he's a known guy. Like, he's been interviewed by. We could probably interview him right now. I could probably get him on the fucking phone right now and get him on the fucking podcast.
Call him.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I got Dugan's fucking number. No, but he's been on a bunch of podcasts, and I do think he's got an interesting idea, although I am not a fan. Okay, Steven from the chat, he had said, the book is complete shit, but credit where it's due. Dugin was a pioneer in directing ostensibly right-wing people into a foul mess of leftard verbiage, constant appeals to the theory cells as a fountain of moral authority, etc. So I just like the idea of theory cells. Our fans are not a fan of Dugin, and I'm not a fan of the ideology, but he's got some points that I would like to explore. So the fourth political theory, that's what he calls it. It's not an ideology. It's not really a theory. It's more of a philosophy. The fourth political theory is not so much an ideology, but just a revolt against liberalism. So I don't think it's possible to separate Duginism from the Russian identity, because he's a Russian guy and he's a proponent of Eurasianism. And so as a Russian, he's against the West. He's against liberalism. And I believe Dugin has the ear of Putin. That's what they say. He's kind of a consult to Putin. And I really do believe that this sort of ideology, it's not even an ideology, but it only exists to destroy liberalism, to fight the West, and also to fight America. So I think that's why Putin might be interested in this sort of thing, because it is anti-American. And so the Eurasianism, it's this idea that Russia and China and Iran and like basically the entire continent of Eurasia basically can be united against America and the West and liberalism. And so that really is the core of what he's proposing here. And the funny thing is, the way to conceptualize Duginism or the fourth political theory, again, it's not an ideology. It's actually the antithesis of an ideology, because he says that, the three political theories prior to this were fascism, communism, liberalism. And we're trying to move past that. And he does not believe that the way forward is with ideology. It's anti-ideology. It's almost, Duginism is almost more of a, like an NAP, non-aggression principle, libertarian sort of thing, where it's like,
yeah,
what if we just had a world where, there was no imperialism. He's very, very anti-imperialist. He's very, very anti-colonialism. He's very, very, anti, globalism in the sense, but he wants to create a world where, Russia, China, the Middle East, everything, they're left on their own. There's no ideology. There's no sort of concept that tries to sweep the world. And he believes that if Eurasia can unite in this sort of non-aggression principle, sort of everyone does their own thing, they can defeat liberalism. And so, I think, and here's the funny thing. Also, let me just say that he is a fan of National Bolshevism. He's a huge fan. Also, he loves the idea of, I guess, nationalist communism. In the book, and I'm not a huge fan of this, but he would always have communism with a capital C, but fascism and liberalism always had, lowercase. So I'm like, okay, this is a guy who sees communism and sees Marxism as superior. In fact, like, he's got nothing but bad things to say about fascism and liberalism and capitalism, but he's a pretty big fan of communism,
Yeah.
it seems to me. So just that's how you should kind of approach this. He's a Russian, so maybe he's got some residual respect for that sort of thing, because
Right.
really the whole point is that he is a Russian, and he believes that there's no way to look at this, not an ideology, but a belief system, without having Russian identity as the center. So I honestly don't think this sort of belief would be palatable to Americans or Europeans or even Africans, whoever.
Yeah.
He is, and I read this other book recently. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think this will be an entire episode, but I had this book called The Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Yeah.
I call him Bijnu. I don't know his name.
Yeah. I was reading this, and it's a very American-centric, very liberal sort of book, written in 1996, so it's kind of dated. But the idea was, it's like, okay, how can America rule the world? And there's a lot of anti-Americans in the chat and what have you, but it's interesting. Like, we did the review of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It's good to get sort of the American-centric liberal take on things, because there are facts in there. So this book was about how basically America needs to take over Eurasia, and that sounds terrible to a lot of our fans, but again, it's interesting to learn. And he makes a good point in the book, where he was like, a lot of people don't recognize how many wars Russia lost. We talked for days about all the wars that America lost, Vietnam, perhaps the Korean War, what have you. But Russia lost a lot of wars. It lost a war, the Sino-Japan, the lost a war with Japan. It lost a war with Poland. It lost the war in Afghanistan, and that was like a 10-year war too. And they were talking, and they lost Ukraine. And he makes a good point about, and the Cold War, obviously. He makes a good point about how the Russian identity is about dominating the Slavic world, especially with Ukraine, because in the book he makes an interesting, like, there's pivot areas and player areas. So there's only so many countries in the world that are really geopolitical players. In Europe, it's still kind of just Germany and France, maybe less France these days, but really it's just Germany. And by a player, we mean the capability to exert influence beyond your borders. So that's Germany and that's France. Britain has no desire to do that. Japan does not really have a desire to do that. And then throughout the entire of Eurasia, it's India, Russia, perhaps Iran. There's a few countries in there. So Russia actually has the ability to exert influence, but it makes a point that they're kind of humiliated. Like, America's been humiliated. It lost a bunch of wars. So did Russia, and it lost Ukraine. It lost the Cold War. It has this fervor, this sort of energy, like but it wants to exert itself, just like America does. And that's why I think, if you look at who the, not enemies, but who the players are, it's China, Russia, America at this point, pretty much.
Yeah.
Maybe Iran. But Russia is kind of looking for, they want to still become the leader of the Slavic world. I think they still hate losing Ukraine, and that's just kind of it's in their fucking soul that they lost it, at the end of the Cold War, at the end of the Soviet Union, because they had that entire region locked up. They actually for around 10 years, the Soviet bloc was the largest empire that had ever existed, if you believe that China was with them. So, but China kind of left them. They were always at odds with the Soviet Union, but for 10 years, the Soviet bloc was the largest empire that ever existed. And actually, in the book, it's kind of interesting. He talks about like the greatest empires that ever existed. So you start with Rome. So Rome had a huge empire, and then Britain had a huge empire, and then the Mongols had a huge empire too. The Mongols are kind of funny because the very reason that people like the Mongols is the very reason why they failed. So there was a whole thing. People always say like, oh, the Mongols, like they kind of went through but they ingratiated themselves to the local culture and they let people keep their culture. That's why they fucking failed. So you had like the Great Khan, who was like the head of it, and he put his sons in different parts of their empires. So they took over some Chinese provinces, and I think one of his sons, they converted to Confucianism, and then he put one of his sons to take over the Islamic world, and he converted to Islam. You know what I mean? So it's like the Mongol Empire just fucking disappeared one day because all his fucking leaders just became. It was just like a fucking Mongol work program.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it because, like, in one sense, like from the sense of a state or an empire, it's a total failure. But if the objective was to pass on great power to your sons and to your lineage, it's actually the greatest empire in history, because now even modern kings can trace their lineage back to them.
Yeah, well, that's just because Genghis Khan liked to rape,
and he was good at it. I mean, don't tell the guy to don't give him a break, right?
It's fair. Yeah, I mean, if you're good at something, you should. If you're good at something, never do it for free.
Everybody should have one chance at their dream job. I think that was in Biden's platform, right? Sorry.
Yeah. No, but yeah. So that's kind of the story of like these great empires, and like we talked about with when I read "Tragedy and Hope" by Carol Quigley. Jennifer Jessica. We talked about how like the concept of an empire is very, very interesting. So with Britain, we talked about, it wasn't really, the empire needs to exert control from the center. There's been no such thing as a democracy in the history of empires. So, Britain was a great example because it's fairly recent, and it was just kind of a money thing. It was just a bunch of colonies, and it was a bunch of private interests that they kind of bought into later on. That was the East India Trading Company. So it was never really an empire in that sense, and that's why it fell apart. That's why America left. That's why Canada doesn't really identify itself with Britain. So it was just this kind of sham empire. And what I like about Duganism, and we'll get into why I don't like it in a second, but what I like about it is that he says that to defeat liberalism, to defeat neoliberalism, to defeat globalism, you need something of a comparable scope. You need something that's very, very large. So he made a point in the book where he's like, the problem is that America controls the discourse in the entire world. So America has its allies. It's got Canada, it's got Britain, it's got Australia and New Zealand and everything. But then there's sort of secondary zones of influence where they don't like America, but they recognize that they are in control and they just want to kind of do their own thing. And that's like kind of Eastern Europe and that's places. And then there's the third zone, which is people that are opposed to America. And that might be Iran, North Korea, some other countries. But these countries are not proposing a different sort of system. They're always just anti-America. They're just anti, but they're not like trying to replace it with anything. So in that sense, you're always, you're allowing America to just, control the discourse in the entire world. So and that's why he was talking about like these countries, these people, these nations that are against America. They're not proposing anything at the scale of America, because they actually have so many allies and so many countries in their zone of influence that you need to think at that scale. So I think that's what he was trying to do with this idea. It's like we need to fight liberalism by kind of joining up, but also not joining up because it's not really an ideology. It's more like just sort of like a libertarianism. Because here's the funny thing about Duginism, like he is very, very anti-racist. So he's, maybe this is why people don't like him, but he's very, very anti-racist. So he expands his definition of racism to include believing that any sort of country is inferior. You see what I'm saying? So he believes that, and this is actually kind of true, he believes that the liberal concept of progress is racist because he believes that, nations or people or whoever lived in the past are not inferior. The entire concept of progress is racist. There's no such thing as better or worse. So in his mind, and he said this in the book, a country like the United States is no different than some fucking tribe in New Guinea, you know what I mean, where they just do shrinking heads. This is what he believes. So, which is, okay. That's an interesting idea. Like, there is no such thing as superior or inferior. And he's got nothing but bad things to say about America and its history with the natives and the slaves and stuff. But he's trying to create a completely anti-racist ideology, which is, okay, sure. Here's the funny thing. Okay, so what he does in the book is he's like, okay, what I'm trying to create is a new sort of philosophy, which is anti-ideology. However, we can take certain things from the previous three political theories, which are Marxism, fascism, and liberalism. We can borrow from that. Let's take the good stuff. So from liberalism, he says he wants to take freedom, the concept of freedom, but kind of a different twist on freedom, not sort of a liberal idea like freedom to do something, but not freedom from something, but freedom to do something. So he's kind of trying to twist the idea of freedom because he believes that the concept of freedom in liberalism is like, you can't tell me what to do, but you should twist that to be free to do things, which would require, more discipline. What he wants to take from Marxism is the critique of capitalism, which is fine, sure. Here's the funny thing. So he hates fascism, cannot stand fascism. However, he does not like how fascism is racist. However, he wants to take the concept of ethnocentrism, which is kind of, it gave me pause reading that. I had to read it a few times. So he hates racism, but he loves ethnocentrism. So in his worldview, racism means that you think your race is better than the others. However, he loves the idea of every ethnicity believing in itself and supporting itself. So it's kind of like an interesting sleight of hand he does there.
I have read a little bit about that, and I think one of the confusions is the way he uses the phrase ethnicity, and I think he says ethnos. Like ethnos is like a particle or a unit, like a cultural unit. of which you could say race is a component, but it's much more to do with habits and rules and systems and organization of the society.
Yeah,
And then this is why, and then it's confusing because you get him on record and he's saying, oh, he believes in ethnocentrism. But then if people ask him if, if you had, I think one guy had asked him, like, if you had a bunch of blacks move to Russia and they spoke Russian and became cultural Russians, would you accept them? And he said, yes, because they've become part of the ethnos. So it's like, I get where you're coming from, but you're presupposing that that's even fucking possible, I guess.
yeah. Like I know, like in the book, I could probably look it up right now, but like he really does say ethnocentrism, because he defines racism as believing your race is superior to another, which he does not like, and that's why he does not like liberalism, because he believes that thinking that what you do in your society is superior to another type of society is bad. So that's kind of where he's coming from. So he thinks he likes ethnocentrism in the sense that Russians behave for Russia and Ukrainians behave and Chinese behave for the Chinese. However, he does not want any of those people, any of these groups, any of these nations to believe that they're superior. And I think that really is the core of Duganism. It's this, again, like I said, it's not an ideology, it's a philosophy. It's an anti-ideology philosophy. It's an anti-hierarchy philosophy in that sense. Like, he would love it if, people in Poland were like strong for Poland and tried to support Polish interests, but he would not like if they thought they were better than Romanians. And you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
again, this is all designed to fight Americans and Western liberalism. So I think that's why Putin might have some interest in it, because the character of Russia, the character and the personality of Russia has always been anti-Western. And like, I'm not the type of guy who says that, they hacked fucking Donald Trump's whatever. Like, I'm not an anti-Russia guy. However, I think it is important to recognize that Russia, first of all, it's not European. Second of all, they've had an adversarial relationship with the West, for better or worse. Like, you could side with Russia. You could be a fan of Russia and be against the West and Europe, but it is true to say that Russia has been largely against the West for a long time, and that's manifested itself in many different ways. So this concept that Dugin is putting forward is designed to actually just destroy liberalism in the West. And it's not like they like China. That's what I would like to establish here. Like, they're not fans of China or the Middle East. They're just, it's a convenient sort of strange bedfellows sort of situation where the only reason they're doing this is just to destroy American hegemony and what have you. Yeah. So anyway, I guess that's mainly Duganism. Like, it's a revolt against universality. So, the idea that liberalism tries to universalize itself, it tries to project itself across the world. He is of the mind that, there's no such thing as universality, which is fair, but I'm not a huge fan of this, because I really do think that the fourth political theory, Dugin's fourth political theory, relies on, it's like the non-aggression principle. Like, it would rely on everyone, just the entire continent of Eurasia just kind of falling in line. It wouldn't, if the Muslims, if Iran wants to do something, if China wants to do something, if North Korea wants to do something, it's like, well, you're not allowed to, but it's like they might, like, is the hatred of America and the West so strong that it will pacify all of these nations? I'm not sure it would.
I think, and this is a take off the top, but I think that you'd have to build more on the systems that exist. I don't think any of those three systems, liberalism, communism, or fascism, are have any real bright future for us. But they're so widespread and complex, and like a web, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't see this as being a powerful enough emergent structure that it could topple those. Because
Yeah.
it does. I mean, and I don't think that you can't create an emergent structure that could topple it. I just don't think this is it. I don't see how this is going to spread like wildfire and multiply itself in the way that it would need to. Because the whole point is it's essentially leaderless and anti-imperial. Like how do you topple an empire without another empire? It's not that you can't do it, but just by saying what if we all get along, what if we all focus inward on our families, is like, come on, that's not helpful. That's platitude, essentially.
Well, he says in the book that I don't believe this is true. He says there's no consensus on what a civilization is. So, like his entire
there's no consensus in his office about what a civilization.
Yeah. Well, he said that, and I think that was early on in the book. And so he says, and again, I don't believe this, but he says that there's civilization and then the savages. So like this is a revolt against the concept of the other. You know what I mean? So like there's us over here, and then there's them. The savages, the barbarians. So he's trying to kind of fight against that. Like, oh, maybe the barbarians think you're barbarians. So what he's trying to do also, it's interesting because this is the European Union. Like he likes the European Union. It's like the European Union. I've come back to this repeatedly where it's like, okay, on the surface, that seems like an imperium. That seems like kind of what we talk about, like a union of European countries dealing with its own interests, and that's as a huge block. And yet that fucking fell apart. And again, like he had mentioned, like we said before, that it really is only France and Germany who are trying to be political actors in the entirety of Europe. It's not Spain. It's not fucking Poland. It's not anything. But that's why Germany's in charge. And so, but it still fucking fell apart. It's still, no one likes it. No one likes the fucking migrant crisis. No one likes everything they're doing. You know what I mean? So I've always thought about that, where it's like, okay, like we talk for days about how we need to unite, how we need to be good, how we need to strengthen ourselves. But then we have the EU, which is just a model of degeneracy and just a piece of shit. So it's like, okay, where did it go wrong? Is it the spirit of Germany? Is it the spirit of Europe? Right? Like on the surface, this should work.
If you compare it, I mean, look, the EU is a bitch empire. Like it's not it's essentially a regulating body. Again, I don't know a lot about this, but to my understanding, it's a big regulating body. It's completely toothless. The EUP are unelected. Nobody respects them, and they don't really rule on a whole lot. It's just big enough to piss people off and get in everybody's way trade and taxes. But I mean, they can't raise an army, and by its design, they can't have a central leader, a central authority. Like if you compare it to the Holy Roman Empire or another, like an actual real empire, if you actually just made a German empire and put all of those countries underneath it, if you made it a Greek empire and you put them all underneath the Greeks, it would probably be a more effective empire than the fucking EU. Like it's literally, it's a rule by committee. It's it's worse than no empire.
There's no such thing as an empire that does not have a center, that does not have a center of control. You know what I mean? So the idea,
but I mean, I guess what I'm saying is the center in this case is headless or toothless, at least, right? Like Germany is absolutely the economic and command center of the EU, but they can't exert any meaningful control. It's kind of like having it's exactly like having a democratic system with 30 different parties and nobody ever has more than a 5% majority. Like you're never going to get anything done. Like somebody needs to take absolute control and wipe everyone else out of the room so that something can get done, or take your toys and go home.
I think our chat would like a German-run Europe with a different sort of leader.
Well, look, forget leader for a second. It's already a German-run Europe. Can we just let the Germans do what they do?
Exactly. and that's why, like, in terms of what Dugin wants to do is sort of kind of like that, because everyone kind of does their own thing, but Germany is in charge. You know what I mean? But it's like that's why I look at he likes the EU. He likes that concept. I'm like, okay, imagine like what do you do? So like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not really it's a philosophy, not an ideology. And I think that's why when you talk about Duganism, it's important to remember that like it's not really it's anti-ideology. It's anti-empire. It's anti-imperial. And I believe he is in charge of a group called the anti-imperial. Hold on. Yeah, I believe he's in charge of some group where it's like the global anti-imperialism movement or group, and then there's all kinds of chapters throughout the world where like it's a nice idea. It's like can't we all just get along? That's what he's saying. You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily disagree with that. I mean, I don't hate the
It's
thrust.
it's a nice philosophy, right? Look at, and I think you're correct comparing it to the nap, which is to say it's a principle. And if you had a society of people or who arrange themselves on this principle, then in a descriptive way, you could say some things about that society. But you're not prescribing anything; you're just describing. You're not telling us how to get there or how to solve all of the problems on the road. You're just saying, hey, if we had this, wouldn't that be great? I don't know. What I got from his work was that actually that it is very, very descriptive. He's starting with first principles. He's starting from positions and not really explaining how we get there or he's explaining how it works once we get there, essentially.
Yeah, well, what he says, which I think is kind of interesting. Again, like his tactics are sound, which is to say, to defeat liberalism, global liberalism, you must have something of a similar scope because you must, like we said before, you must understand how large America is and how large the West is in kind of getting its allies throughout the world. Like you can't just defeat liberalism by complaining about it. So you need something that's kind of unifying. I like that. I don't like a lot of the other stuff, but I that's a good idea because he's talking about like not letting liberalism control the conversation, as it were. But he's also talking about how liberalism defeated traditionalism. You know what I mean? So he's trying to take the same tactics. He's trying to take the same ideas and, liberalism persecutes tradition and the way liberalism defeated traditionalism, perhaps you can use those same tactics to defeat liberalism. That's what he's saying. And I'm like, okay. I it is like it's not bad. Like futurism, like we talked
I
about.
was
Like
just gonna say there's some top level stuff which is really solid. It's worth drawing from, but there's a lot more work to be done there.
yeah. And basically what it is humanism. I think it's like everyone's a person, everyone's okay. So this is antithetical to what you might say fascism, where or communism, where because communism sees the world as class and fascism sees the world as cultures and different types of groups, and liberalism sees everyone as the individual. So the fourth political theory, as he calls it, tries to like destroy all of that and say we're just people and everything's just who cares. You know what I mean? So I'm like, okay, but I just don't think that's gonna be a long term thing, because at least with fascism, at least with we didn't talk about fascism, but I did a bunch of reading by Oswald Mosley and Mussolini, and it's like they talk about how this is just politics. Like we'll have to evolve later on. What we're trying to do is kind of organize society, but we are set up for change because as the as the world changes, we'll need to adapt to it. And I'm like, I just don't see this as having the same sort of core idea of adaptability. Like it's just hoping, like anarchism, like it's just hoping everything works out.
Yeah.
he's seen as kind of a figure that people laugh at and joke at. I think there's something here, just like futurism. I think there's something there, but I honestly, and I don't. It's so geopolitical in its scope because it really is just designed to be against North America and the West. So like I don't know if you could be, a Canadian Duginist. I don't think you could, because unless you become Russian or Ukrainian.
You could. So like most players on the Toronto Maple Leafs, fucking Russians.
Yeah,
we should call them the Duginists, as in dude rock.
Dudes be rocking. And he looks like a cool Russian guy with a big beard.
Oh yeah, seems like a chill guy.
I'll get him on the phone.
you hear you lean back in your chair, just shuffling for your fucking Motorola. Yeah, where's the Dugin phone?
Where's the Dugin phone? I have a whole phone just for him. We could probably get him on the podcast to explain it and
see that fringe and desperate that he would talk to us.
Well, he's been on a lot of podcasts with not that many viewers, so I think we probably could.
Wouldn't he hate us because we're liberal Anglos?
He might not like us because we're Anglos. I mean, I'm a fascist monarchist, and you're an ANCAP. So
truly, neither one of us is liberal, but I mean, we're Anglos, which means we're liberal. I don't know if that's how it works.
Which means we eat some fucking fish and chips. We're talking to him. Get some, just there eating tartar sauce. Yeah, this is what we do.
With a spoon. It's good.
No, with a fork.
Oh, fine.
Eat tartar sauce with a spoon, you fucking degenerate. You fucking black person.
You Dravidian. Yeah.